add any chats to it, that's perfect too. Okay, so thank you very much. Right, we're going to kick it off. We've got some amazing attendees on the call, and we're going to kick it off. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. I'm Ritika Vadhva. I am the CEO and founder of Prabhav Global. Prabhav means impact in Hindi. And what we do is use the transformational power of cultural intelligence for impactful leadership. So today's webinar is about how CQ can be applied specifically to how we hire, recruit people, and then how we make them feel once they become our colleagues and employees. How do we retain them? How do we keep them in the organizations? Before I get to introducing the amazing panelist, I want to share one of my favorite quotes, very specific to the webinar today, which is this: if we do not maximize the human experience, we fail to optimize human performance. CQ sits at the heart of maximizing the human experience by how we hire them into organization and then how we keep them in our organization so that we can optimize their performance. And that's what all organizations are tasked to do. So just a little bit of what is it? Logistics is the word, a little bit of logistics. This session is being recorded. I hope that's okay. We're going to add it to our website and of course send it to you for everyone who signed up to watch later and promote it. There is a Q&A, as we've seen, there is a Q&A, but also because the chat is not enabled, please feel free to add any comments and talk to us through the Q&A. All right, that was a little bit from me, and I'm going to over and out to our lovely panelists to introduce themselves and their organizations. Colette, you're first on my screen, so I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Ritika. So hello, everyone. My name is Colette Black. I'm joining you today as the Director of People Services and the Assistant Chief Exec for Essex County Fire and Rescue Service. I was also fortunate in 2014 to be identified as the most influential woman in fire by the Fire Excellence magazine and by the Asian Fire Service Association for my work in positive action. So I hope to bring some of that to the conversation today. Lovely to join you.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you. Colette and I sit together and co-chair the Essex County Fire and Rescue Services Culture First Board, and we will probably go into that later in our conversation. Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Ritika. Hello, everyone. First off, I feel very privileged to be part of your panel on such an important topic. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob. I'm Head of Talent Acquisition at Taylor Wesson. We're a global law firm, 27 offices, 17 locations, 1,200 lawyers, speak, not me personally, 40 languages. And I've spent about 2/3 of my career helping organisations find great people and helping great people find the right opportunities. So I lead our hiring strategy and work closely with teams across the business to make sure that we're attracting and supporting top talent. I am a white middle-aged male. I don't like the middle-aged bit, but I am. I'm an active ally. I'm passionate about creating inclusive and thoughtful hiring experiences, and I'm very privileged to sit on our inclusion board and also co-chair our cultural diversity network here at Taylor Wesson. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rob. 40 languages. I'll give you the challenge. Next time we're on a webinar together. We'll work on that. All right. Thank you so much. Lionel, last but not the least.
Thanks, Ritika. And again, just to echo what Rob said, I am really fortunate to be on this panel, particularly with you and the good work that you do. So Lionel Olusi, by introduction, Director Head of Talent Acquisition, Development and Mobility at an organisation called British International Investment. By training and qualification, I'm an organisational psychologist, which in other words means how do we get the most out of people and make sure that people in organisations are performing to their utmost best. British International Investment is an impact investor, so we invest across the world, primarily across emerging markets, with the aim of empowering those communities, ensuring that marginalised groups are brought to the light, and also with a commercial return on that as well. So inclusivity is in our DNA. In terms of our organisational makeup, we are about 50 nationalities, 700 people across 12 offices across the world. So excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Lionel. Thanks for that introduction. I am quite keen to go into the name, the initial name of BII, if you don't mind. Do you mind sharing
Sure,
that?
sure. Yeah, so British International Investment, our shareholder is the FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, and BI was set up in 1948. And at the time, if you think about the UK in 1948 and its impact and influence across most emerging markets, was very interesting, let's say. And I would say over the last 76, 77 years, really that change of company name from CDC with the word colonial in that to now British International Investment is quite an evolution, both in mission and really focused on how do we make sure that we're partnering with the organizations that we invest in, as opposed to anything else other than that. And so, yeah, you're right to actually ask that question, Ritika, because I think there are lessons learned in ensuring that when you're engaging with communities, you're doing it in a way that's respectful, that's inclusive, and one that is empowering. So yeah, quite a journey.
Quite a journey. Thank you. Thank you. And so we have deliberately curated a panel which brings very diverse perspectives, not just from their own lived experiences, but subject matter expertise in this field from a cross-sector experience. So we've got Rob, who's private sector, we've got Colette, who's public sector, and I always consider Lionel as somewhere in the middle of both, although officially you are public sector. So those are the diverse perspectives that we will hear from our amazing panelists today. Before I ask my first question to the panelists, I just want to set the tone for the CQ framework, which is what the topic of the webinar today is culturally intelligent recruitment and retention. So what is cultural intelligence? In a nutshell, cultural intelligence is the ability to work with people that are different from us. Emotional intelligence will take us this far in working with people that are like us. But consider what's going on in the world around us with globalization, with digitalization, with polarization. What we need now is cultural intelligence more than anything else, because it isn't just about the color of the skin. It isn't just about gender. It isn't just about nationality either. It is about everything that makes us different from each other in the best way possible. How we communicate with each other, how we pursue or perceive hierarchy, how we perceive risk as an individual. Those are some of the facets that work behind the cultural intelligence framework. So cultural intelligence framework has 4 capabilities: CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, CQ action. Our conversation today, 4 questions on each of those capabilities in a way. So CQ drive is the why. Are we even motivated to work with people that are different from us? CQ knowledge, what do we know about how cultures are similar and different? CQ strategy, how do we rethink almost how we plan to work with people that are different from us? And last but not the least, CQ action, how do we actually act? How do we actually show up? And that's why Prabhav impact, because this is about how we turn our intent, our motivation into impact, which is action, and the journey that we take along the way for that. So with that very brief uptake on what is CQ and the CQ framework, my first question to the panelists, and Colette, I'd love for you to start off with, is why do you think cultural intelligence should even be considered in your work specific to fire and rescue services? And this is, what are the recruitment and retention challenges which might tie into why is CQ even important at all?
So we know that fire and rescue services exist to serve our communities. And we know that when we look across UK fire and rescue services, there are 49 altogether in the UK, that their demographic makeup is different depending on the part of the country that they serve. So in Essex, for example, we know that through census data and research in creating our community risk management plan, that the demographic of Essex continues to change. And we know that when we serve that demographic with diversity of thought, that we provide the best service that we can that we can do. So why then do I think CQ is important? I think it helps us to provide the best service that we can. I think it helps us to attract and retain a diverse group of employees, and in turn that helps us to have a risk appetite that's appropriate. It helps us to have conversations with parts of the community we might otherwise find it more difficult to have conversations with. To share an example of that, for example, we know that Essex has an ageing demographic, and we know that that in some parts of our county that demographic is not ageing well. That of course then has implications for recruitment, and it has implications for retention. So knowledge, of course, always power. With that information available to us, we can adapt our strategy, we can adapt our training, we can adapt our development. So I see CQ as being integral to us providing a good public service.
Thank you, Colette, 100%, because ultimately public service is about how we serve the community. And if we don't understand what the community needs, and we don't understand how we garner respect, or how we actually get our community to trust, I think that's the word that's sat central to some of the conversations that you and I have been having around how do we get our community to trust the fire and rescue services, not just when things are going wrong, but also perhaps when things are okay, and almost as a hub. And so understanding the community should really be central to the motivation on why CQ is needed. That why. Thank you, Colette. Rob.
Thank you, Rizka. I think so. At Taylor Weston, we're at the foothills of our cultural intelligence journey. So we have started to embed it in the sense that it is now a theme, and that theme is going to continue throughout the year and well beyond that. So as I say, that's the slight caveat at the start of this. But for us, it's about understanding better and embracing better different perspectives, and making sure that our culture and hiring practices really do reflect that. And my view is that CQ is a strategic asset in recruitment and retention. And I think, as you've already highlighted, as Colette said, it allows us, and of course others, to connect with a broader and more diverse talent pool. And it's really challenging. I know it is in every discipline, but it is particularly challenging in legal. And I think it can really help address inefficiencies in identifying best prospects by, again, improving that communication piece that you said, obviously reduce bias, and then can enhance the candidate experience across different cultural lines. We, and I'm sure other organisations, can't no longer afford, in my view, to simply focus solely on credentials and experience. Of course, some of that is important depending on where you're hiring. And we can't simply focus on traditional notions of fit. You do hear that a lot in organisations, and in particular in the legal sector. But increasingly, what I think sets high-performing organisations, and law, like others, is a high-performing organisation, is really the ability to recognise and develop that CQ. Because CQ is that ability to work effectively across cultures. Yes, national, international cultures, but in my view, it's broader than that. It's across differences in race, gender, neurodiversity, socioeconomic background, and I suppose the interplay between each of those and more. I was looking at some stats for this panelist, for this panel, and I think, to me, the business case is simple and super compelling. You can get different stats on this, but there's a couple of McKinsey reports, one in particular that shows companies with greater ethnic diversity are 39% more likely to outperform their less diverse peers. Excellent. Diverse teams, as we probably know, bring broader perspectives. Excellent. They drive innovation. Excellent. And they're more adaptable. Excellent. But only if that organisation has that cultural competence, that underlying piece about CQ, to harness that diversity effectively. So I think for me, the CQ isn't just about being inclusive, it's about being competitive, and I mean that in a very positive way. It's a leadership capability, and that's across all levels, forget hierarchy here, that directly impacts recruitment efficiency and employee loyalty, and also directly impacts that long-term organisational performance. And in law firms, and of course other organisations, but specific to the legal sector, it matters hugely. And why does it matter hugely? Because the legal profession is diversifying, but slowly. Significantly, but slowly. And I think those are the key words for me. And we're regulated by what's called the Solicitors Regulation Authority, so the SRA. I looked at their 2023 data set, so hopefully it's better than this, but over 23% of solicitors in larger firms, as they describe it, larger law firms, now come from ethnic minority backgrounds, and more than a third of the profession is made up of first-generation professionals. So that talent pool is really changing, and I think really our approach must do as well. And that's where CQ can really play a huge part, because if we don't, then we risk misleading talent, we risk alienating prospects, I think we risk mismanaging inclusion once people are in through the door. So it's really rethinking what we value as a law firm in this instance. And say, are we still hiring based on who's polished and who's confident, or are we assessing that adaptability, that empathy, and that ability to navigate difference? Because these are vital skills for client-facing roles in what I think you just mentioned, it kind of global and kind of pluralistic market.
Excellent, Rob. Excellent. You made a point already, which is research-based as far as the CQ framework is concerned. That is, homogeneous teams outperform diverse teams when cultural intelligence is missing. So homogeneous teams will perform to a certain level. You throw diversity in the mix, which we want to for the good reasons, for the right reasons, but actually performance goes down because people don't know how to work with each other. But when they learn how to work with each other, and always call this get the house in order first, then get your guests into the house, then it's when performance hits the roof. So that is that diverse teams with CQ, that is the secret sauce. As my friend Rob Neal, who's also on the call, will say his words, the secret sauce. Thank you, Rob, for that shout out. So thank you for that, Rob, and thanks for those statistics and data, really, really important. I just want to tie into, before we go to Lionel, what both you and Colette are saying from a public-private sector is that we need to serve our communities. What is the option? If we don't serve our communities, what is the option? Do we exist? If we don't serve our customers, in your case, Rob, if we don't hire the right talent, and look at what aging population in Essex, the young generation coming in through for law firms, how do we keep them all interested in wanting to work for our organizations? Because what's the alternative? So with that, Lionel, we'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think Colette and Rob have articulated that perfectly. I think particularly you captured this really well at the beginning, where you said, given globalization and the diversification of the world, actually without cultural intelligence, how can you navigate the world? I mean, if you look at the makeup of the UK and representation across the many communities up and down the country, and across Europe, actually, I think if you don't have cultural intelligence on a personal level, it makes it very difficult in everyday life, particularly at work, or little stuff like going to a shop and understanding how to communicate in an effective and a respectful way. I do want to look at this through two lenses. One that Colette talked about, the idea of serving communities. And that applies when BII, British International Investment, is talking about our investee organizations, right? We want to make good investments. So it's about serving the communities that may or may not look like you or sound like you or have the shared values that you do in a way that makes sense, in a way that's inclusive. And I think the other lens, if you move away from the customer focus to the internal focus from a HR standpoint, inclusivity really means that cultural intelligence is at the forefront of how you build a DNA of your organization. I sincerely believe that IQ and emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence are all on par. And whilst their journeys may be different in terms of how long they've existed for, given the globalization point, I actually think from a business standpoint, it's very difficult to do business if you don't understand your customers, and it's very hard to attract the right talent if you're unable to understand their backgrounds and their shared beliefs. And inclusivity means diversity, right? It's bringing different perspectives into the workplace in a way that's acceptable and a way that's inclusive. I think the only other point I'll probably labor is we're talking about this because our organizations are based in the UK. I think where you have branches and where you have offices outside of the UK, I think cultural intelligence also applies that way around. So whilst our lens may be UK focused, if we do have offices in other locations, it's really important they're part of that journey of understanding vice versa what it may mean to be culturally intelligent.
Thank you, Lionel. Great points. I'm writing away some really key points as you are all speaking to capture that at the end. But I'm glad you mentioned IQ, EQ, and CQ. So let me elaborate that on a little bit. IQ is something that obviously we all understand develops to a certain age as we get into adulthood, and then it doesn't develop anymore unless there's a life-changing factor. But typically, it's static, really. EQ and CQ are malleable capabilities that can be developed. And there's a question from the audience about CQ being static or dynamic. They are capabilities that can be developed. It's like going into the gym. The more you practice, the more you can develop your EQ and CQ. Now, emotional intelligence works really well when we work with people that are like us, in that if I'm sitting opposite someone who is very similar to me in my profile and my lived experience, let me give you an example. Indians do this head nod. It could mean a million things, but I can understand right away what that means because I've got the inside knowledge as an Indian. And that's what we mean by EQ. It doesn't necessarily translate across boundaries and borders that easily as CQ does. So we need EQ to start with, we need IQ to start with, but we need CQ in the context, as Lionel has said, that we're operating in. And the most important part of that context is that your customers, your community is diverse, whether that's age, whether that's neurodiversity, whether that's generational, whatever you might call it, it is diverse. It is incumbent upon us as organizations in order for us to survive that we understand our customer base, our clients, our community more than ever before. And that's what CQ can help with. So thank you for that phenomenal answers there. Moving on to the second question, because what we've done here with the first question is we've unpacked the why, the drive, the motivation for why we should be investing in working and building that muscle that is CQ to work with people that are different from us. That's right there, your CQ drive, because if you don't, then look at what happens. Moving on to the second question, which ties into CQ knowledge, the second capability. Do our panelists think that the change in national and international movement on diversity, equity, inclusion is affecting the application of jobs, is affecting how psychologically safe those that are applying feel and those that are currently within organizations feel in the context of the world that we are operating in right now? So back to you, Colette, for your first response on that. Thank you.
I think we are seeing a change there. So we know that for people to feel confident in applying for a role, they need to feel psychologically safe. They need to feel able to learn, to contribute, and to challenge. One of the definitions of psychological safety, of course, there are other definitions out there. And what we hear in some of the international and national narrative at the moment challenges some of the social identities that we have become familiar with recently. So, for example, the concept of having a social identity that enables you to feel that you belong. And I think some of what we're hearing at the moment is an emboldening of a narrative around that sense of belonging, and that sense of belonging then relying upon an othering of those with less represented characteristics, particularly in my environment in the UK, and of course Lionel and Rob may have a broader perspective of that. So yes, I think we are seeing a change, and I, like many others, of course, have concern that that will affect the positive progress we have seen in terms of applicants feeling some confidence in accessing positive action, which enables them to come to the table. In fire and rescue, for example, we particularly enact positive action to encourage female applications into firefighting roles. So 8% of our operational workforce are female. From research I undertook last year in 14 fire and rescue services with 30 women indicated the need for those applicants to feel psychologically safe to progress their applications. And a long answer to your short question, but I think when we hear the national and international narrative at the moment, it has the potential to challenge that feeling of safety, and then the ability to exist in a newly negotiated social space.
Such brilliant points there, Colette. The world is changing around on the axis as we speak. And so how do organizations really um, translate that into what it means for the employees that they are hiring and want to keep. So thank
Yeah.
you for that. And positive action, what does that mean? And were you going to say something?
Well, we'll go on to talk about actions, I think, but I think there are some really clear steps that we can take to balance that narrative and to encourage those applications to come forward. But yeah, I know we'll move on to that.
Yeah. And so from the knowledge perspective, really, what we're discussing is, what do we know right now? What do we know about what's going on in the world? What do we know about what is it that applicants want from jobs? What is it that's more important? Is it salary? Is it flexibility? It's understanding what we know. And if I may actually share something I experienced, specifically in the fire and rescue services. I remember a fire chief of a country who got up and said, we've just recruited 200 fighters into our workforce. Another fire chief from another country, from an EU perspective, said, oh, that's brilliant. How did you do that? And then he shared, well, we advertise the role within fire services as something that's heroic. And then, of course, it's a public sector job. It means possibly a job for life. Now, that doesn't translate, because in the UK, you've got the younger generation that is signing up to the fire services and is not even signing up for the pension. So they're not looking at it as a job for life that those that have worked in fire services forever and more have. Secondly, when we advertise the role as heroic, another fire chief from another European country said, well, in my country, it wouldn't be okay from a Christian perspective to advertise the role as heroic. And so just having the knowledge of who we want to hire and literally what would tick the box for them is so key to where do we then go from there, and how do we appeal to that audience. And that's where that CQ knowledge box sits. So thank you for sharing that, Colette. Rob, what would you like to add to that?
I agree with everything Colette said. I think, like, personally, absolutely. I think the evolving landscape of ED&I, for the UK and globally, is in my view, is having a profound impact on how people apply and how safe they feel at work. And you might be able to get a different stat, but whilst I know we're near the right percentage, I think it's around circa 57% of, this is in the UK, businesses now consider ED&I a strategic priority of recruitment. That's great, but actually that's not good enough. But the positive is, I think that it reflects a growing awareness that candidates, or prospects as we call in the legal sector, they're not just looking for a job, and are not just evaluating roles based on salary and prestige, which you just spoke about, Ritika. But there is obviously a base bit there, who actually are asking questions like, will I belong here? Will I be respected here? Will my lived experience be valued or just tolerated? And they're looking for a workplace where they feel, as we said, psychologically safe, respected, and able to thrive, actually. I think the good news in the legal sector is, so closer to home, is that the Law Society of England and Wales has been calling for the sector, and we are doing this, to go beyond service level diversity to tackle their structural inclusion and equitable progression. However, this and other things is obviously happening in a complex context in what we've kind of just alluded to, because internationally, of course, we're seeing a polarization, you used that word earlier, Ritika, of attitudes towards ED&I. With obviously some countries very regrettably rolling back their DE&I policies, and that's obviously undoubtedly sparked concern about whether organisations, I know there's people around the world on this call, but in the UK might follow suit, or already doing so, regrettably. And I think this uncertainty can can create anxiety for both your current and your prospective employees, especially those from marginalised backgrounds. So I think, and that's why inclusive leadership, and that's why, in my view, kind of the CQ bit is really important, because the ability to navigate that difference with empathy and with clarity, again, a word you used earlier as well, Ritika, I think it's more important than ever. And the movement on ED&I is absolutely, again, in my view, influencing how people view employers. And those who lead with transparency, those who lead with authenticity, and those who lead with a commitment to psychologically safe environments will not only attract that top talent and win out against their competitors, they're absolutely keep it. I know we'll talk about retention later. So what are we seeing, and it sounds like it's generic, but it is very true to the legal sector, is that candidates, prospects, they're researching the firm values, they're researching our values before the leadership diversity, what they're seeing, and the retention data even before they even apply, right? We're seeing increased requests for adjustments and inclusive recruitment practices on the rise, which is good. And then actually greater scrutiny of whether ED&I efforts are performative authentic. I think when this isn't actually handled well, so when firms, this isn't us in our camp, fortunately, just to be clear, fall short of their stated values, I think that actually erodes psychological safety, because people feel they have to mask their identity to fit in. That's wrong. They feel that they fear about speaking up because that might cost them their career progression. That's wrong. They hesitate to apply in the first place if the signals aren't right, and organisations are losing out on talent. And I think, in my view, what I think is often overlooked by lots of organisations is that psychological safety starts at the point of first contact. And what do I mean by that? Often before application. So it's actually in the imagery we use, in recruitment campaigns. It's the language, of course, that we use in our job descriptions. It's a diversity of the interview panel when you actually get in the building, and whether we're transparent about that career progression, whether that's hybrid working, well-being, etc. And of course, Colette used this word as well. I think for those that are already inside the firm, the ED&I movement is emboldening more people to speak up. But then, of course, that raises rightly the expectations on employers and leaders at whatever level to meet those expectations of, again, with the empathy, consistency, and clarity. And that, just briefly, that means, actively addressing microaggressions. That means ensuring feedback processes are fair and inclusive. It means making sure policies, whether you're in the building or before, because people ask about it, are they lived realities or are they just statements on a website? I'll just leave it there for now. So I'm pretty passionate about this stuff.
No, and that's coming through, and we love that. Keep it coming. We love it. Thank you, Rob. Equitable progression. That is the only way forward. And if organizations don't embrace that, then I keep saying, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? Where are you going to end up? Because if you don't do it, your competition will. If you don't do it, your clients are doing it. So really, what is the option? Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Lionel.
Yeah, I think Colette and Rob have almost touched on the most salient point. I think the piece, Rob, that you've mentioned that really resonates with me is the idea that some organizations, as its perception in the current terrain, whether it be social or political, that some organizations are performative in how they present. So they'll have certain faces perhaps on their websites. Now, there is a difference between performative and aspirational. And I think, not every organization is perfect. And as long as those aspirations are pragmatic and there are actions behind those aspirations, that's very different to painting a picture that's unrealistic. And when we think about the employee value proposition, which in other words is an organization articulating what is great and unique about working at your organization or said place, the authenticity of that is really important. And the point Rob mentioned about the initial touch point and Colette's point about psychological safety, that really does implicitly, I think, shine through the recruitment process to the extent where you'll have attrition that is much shorter, unfortunately, if you do bring people into your organization, you're expecting one thing and receive something that's completely different. I do think, to answer your question directly, Ritika, do you think that the change in national international movement on ED&I is having an impact? I think this is where we need to restate the case for cultural intelligence and also be really clear about the definition of EDI. I think you've said it earlier on, Ritika, it is beyond the traditional protected characteristics that people automatically think of when they think of ED&I, which is race and gender. Actually, it is about being neurodiverse. It's about sexual orientation. It's about religion. But actually, with cultural intelligence, it adds a different lens, which is beliefs, your shared beliefs. What are your beliefs that transcend purely what you look like? So yes, absolutely, the current politics of the day is having an impact. But given how many people we have on this call, it's up to us, I think, in our position, probably predominantly within the HR space and the business space, to restate that case in a way that may seem like baby steps, but is pragmatic and realistic. And tools like the tool set you mentioned there, Ritika, I think is really useful in articulating it in a way that's really digestible, that organizations can actually use in a meaningful way.
No, thank you. So a couple of points I want to pick up from there to summarize really is the conversation in very honest terms. What we're having with everybody right now is call it what you want, call it EDI, call it culture, call it employee value proposition, call it what you want, but the work needs to be done. The work needs to be done, because if it's not done, then again, back at what cost? So so you've mentioned that, okay, how do we make it palatable? And this is where I found that the CQ framework, and I have trained very senior leadership teams in multinational organizations where, let's assume hypothetically, everybody looks very similar to each other on the surface of it anyway, at least. But actually, they couldn't be more different from each other because of just what their behavioral preferences are. So this becomes a very non-confrontation sort of way to really embody what a cultural shift, transformation, or EDI, if you want to call it, means, because how one behaves is based mainly on how we were brought up rather than where we were brought up. And so there's a million examples for what that means, how we were brought up compared to where we were brought up. And this is where CQ becomes so poignant in how we can affect that change, because again, what the generational aspect to it as well. We could all be brought up in a certain generation in different parts of the world, but that could still bind us more than those that are from a different generation in the same country. So so I'll leave that. And then, so what we've done now is we've done the why, which is CQ drive, the how. We know what is going on in the world. We know what is needed. We have the knowledge. The CQ strategy is the how. How are we translating the why and the what? So actually this timeline, I'll start with you. How is BII representing themselves to attract talent?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would like to think, honestly, but also, as I mentioned earlier, with aspiration. We're really fortunate. You know, we have there's actually over 60 nationalities at our organization. And given our mission is focused on investing within emerging economies, specifically across the continent of Africa and South Asia, Southeast Asia, it does attract a very diverse group of people. But when I, in terms of the audience, in terms of looking at the recruitment life cycle and perhaps what we're doing to better inform that, it's how we're marketing ourselves. So one thing we're very sure to do is make sure that all candidates meet an honest subset of the people they'll be working with. And we don't do what some organizations do, that I've witnessed, which is pick out people that may look like that person to assess and interview them, is actually looking beyond that and making sure that it is an honest assessment of who you'll probably be working with for the majority of your time at the organization. I think sometimes we forget as people that we spend more time, unfortunately, with our work colleagues than our families. And that's quite an investment to spend that much time in the workplace. So it's really important that the realities of where you're going to work match the impression that was initially given in the first instance. I would also say that development means different things to different audiences based on culture. So being able to express what development means, career development means, with that in mind, I think is really important. And we've seen some really interesting successes as a result of that. And all that means is using different lenses of identity and bearing in mind those opinions to work out, well, how do you want your career to develop and why? Now, if there happens to be a correlation with maybe their culture or maybe what they look like, then we use that information to understand, well, why is it that we don't have more people that identify in this way at senior leadership? So I think data plays a really important role with how we present ourselves and how we show up. I would say, lastly, it's being really honest about what our strategic objectives are. So at British International Investment, two of our strategic objectives, which is linked to our long-term incentive plan for employees, is to ensure that a certain percentage of our directorship identify as female or from Black heritage. And that was in our last 5-year period. And that was very intentional. And I think that really shows that we're committed to making sure we have representation across the organization in the spaces of identity where we could be doing better.
Wow, Thank you. That's that's so on point. Thank you, Lionel. Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Lionel. That's really fascinating, and you know, I pick up on the data point. I mean, data is really, really important, right? And is for us. I mean, we're more at the foothills on the data front than in our TA team, but we're certainly not as progressed as we would like. And I say that in a positive light, because more data that we can have, clean data that we can use to actually inform ourselves as to how we are attracting talent in its broadest sense, the better. So we do look at that on a very, very regular basis, and we bring that to our business partners and our stakeholders, because if it's not a one size fits all in that sense to attract talent. I think at a macro level, we're at Taylor Weston, we're really focused on, this word has been used a lot, but really focused on showing up authentically. And actually, we're progressive in many ways, and there are lots of other things that we need to do, actually. And as long as our feedback has been, as long as you're open and honest about those things that you need to do, then actually people buy into that, and there's an open conversation about it. So we know people want more than just a job. In the legal sector, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for growth, and they're looking for a culture that they can actually connect with. So we're making sure, where we possibly can, we hope we are, that what candidates see from the outside actually genuinely reflects who we are on the inside, right? And as with any business in our business, there are pathways to attracting talent may differ. So for what I mean by that is we recruit partners, okay, and that will look different to how we perhaps recruit graduates, or indeed, like me, professional support staff. But the foundation of our strategy, we hope, is very consistent, in the sense that we are an inclusive, forward-thinking and purpose-led firm. So we do foster that culture where diversity is celebrated and everyone feels that they belong. We embrace that innovation, whether that's hybrid working, modern leadership, etc. And we like to think, we hope we are very human centered. What do I mean by that? We prioritize well-being, we prioritize that psychological safety that we referred to, and also that personal growth, whilst encapsulating that within a high performance organization. And this value set, it's not just aspirational, they're embedded in how we do recruit, onboard and develop talent, because you can't be telling someone one thing when they're coming in, all bells and whistles, and it's exactly not what we've sold on the way in. So what we, is almost what we say is what binds us, and the common thread is we are a firm of people at every level where you can thrive. We want you to find a place here where your voice matters and actually your potential is nurtured. I suppose some of the practical things that we've invested in this sense to attract talent is that, in particular, at the early career stage, and credit goes to other people on this call, in terms of kind of contextual recruitment, so a hiring approach that takes into account the candidate's background and circumstances during the recruitment process. We very much kind of promote all of our inclusion networks, which goes a long way, and actually to show that they are active. And actually, if they're not active as much as you may want, then you've got the ability to help change that once you're in our business. And for us, none of this is PR. Again, it's part of that value proposition that Lionel said at every career stage. We spend a lot of time around kind of our social media strategy. I've said at the start here around people looking at shop window, so to speak, before they even buy you. That will apply across all organisations, but particularly in law, in my view. And so, behind the scenes of life at our firm, with real stories from real people. Again, no polished PR. It's just honest. It's human, and we hope relatable. And for us, it's kind of promoting things that we do internally here, like again, not unique, but running a reverse mentoring program, and how people have actually kind of taken to that, and the positives that have come out of it. And then again, early talent example here, again, credit to other people, but about how we partner with organisations like Rare Recruitment and Aspiring Solicitors to bring that next generation of talent in, has really, really gone quite a long way.
Some great practical tips there. Thank you, Rob. Colette.
Super. So we talk about the breadth of careers in fire and rescue to challenge what I think is an upset assumption still, that we have one career and that's firefighting, and of course that's not not the case. We then talk to 4 points based upon psychological safety. So we talk about the role models who are available in fire and rescue. We talk about the sense of belonging that you can access within fire and rescue. We're clear about behaviours, those that we anticipate, and the action that we take in that space. And we describe the support that's available, particularly for those who are currently underrepresented, whether that's opportunities for social connection, or practical opportunities for things like fitness days for those applying for firefighting. So 4 very clear pillars, if you like, to broaden application.
Wow. It makes me want to join the fire service.
Come
There
on.
we go.
Me
There
too.
we go. Okay. Just on to the last question then. So we've tackled CQ drive, the why, the knowledge, the what, the strategy, the how, and then the action is really getting on to doing it. So this is the part where folks on the call get their money back, which is how do you retain talent, isn't it? Role models, and how do we engage and inclusion, and what does that mean? What does it practically mean to retain talent in action? Words, that's not just words, but also what it is in action. So couple of minutes each to our panelists. We'll start with Lionel.
Yeah, and the action piece is where it counts, right? When you put rhetoric to one side, what are we actually doing? So this is, for me, this is what we're doing at BAI. This is part of our learning and talent development strategy, and it's linked to our recruitment strategy. And I see the two as a spectrum, right? When you see it as silos, that's where you run the risk of just bringing people in and not recognizing where they thrive. So I would say the 3 headers. A is keeping your pulse on the organization, the heartbeat of the organization. So you get a sense of where culture and views are shifting, and making sure you're addressing it where necessary. So that pulse survey or that regular engagement survey is very important. I would say B, it's also about giving opportunity in a meaningful way that's clearly expressed, and Colette mentioned that in her quadrant as well, what that looks like. And then C, it's and I'll go into B in a little more detail. And C, it's knowing when to let go as well as organization, right? Gone are the days. Yeah, gone. What I mean by that, to clarify, gone are the days where we stay in places of work for 20, 30, 40 years. And actually, when someone has contributed to the organization really well, and they've got mentors or sponsors or coaches who say, "You've done really well here. You've achieved your milestones. Why don't you consider a different way of developing?" If we in our organization are unable to provide an alternative route or some kind of opportunity, it's being really open and transparent, and encouraging in a way that's accepting of what could be next for them. So going back to that piece I said about opportunity, our career value proposition for me is fourfold. It is giving experiences with culture intelligence in mind. That could mean doing a secondment in a different team. That could mean going to live in another market or in markets or another office in another country to learn more about how colleagues operate in that space. It's also about exposure. Rob touched on it, reverse mentoring is one. But also non-linear careers for people you don't expect to see in those spaces. I think we have unconscious bias, all of us do. We're born with it. It's inevitable. And we have to really be conscious of it in order to reverse that. So if there is someone who looks a certain way or sounds a certain way, or is a certain age group that you think, well, actually, they're never going to make it in this group. Actually, let's challenge that. Let's look at the talent and let's understand, could they actually, given the right tools, advice, and experience, achieve more than the traditional prototype of who would fit into that position? And then lastly, is the learning piece. I believe this 70-20-10 model. 70% experiences, 20% social learning, 10% education. I mean, there's a lot to be said around making sure, as HR professionals, that mandatory learning is taken seriously, because sometimes we forget those lessons, and there is a place as annoying as that email comes around to do that training every 6 months or so ever, it is really important that we remind ourselves of those key lessons that we can apply on a day-to-day basis.
Really great points there. Thank you. Thank you, Lionel. I'm just conscious of time and questions are pouring in. So sorry, Rob and Colette, couple of minutes to tie down those actionable strategies for retaining talents. And then we'll at least have 5 minutes, hopefully, for questions. Rob.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I would just say at macro level, I think everybody in the organisation plays a part in retaining talent because in my view, again, retention is not about one initiative, it's about creating that ecosystem, I think, where people feel they can grow, they can belong and kind of have fulfilling careers. And to Lionel's point, if it's not with your organisation to support those people to get the best elsewhere. I think and the other point I wanted to make was that again, in my view, what truly drives retention now is that emotional and cultural contract actually between a firm and its people. And at the heart of that contract, I think there are multiple drivers. You could probably talk about it endlessly, but 3 of them being representation, engagement, and inclusion. So representation meaning role models. You can't be what you can't see effectively. So people do stay where they see themselves in leadership, whatever that may mean to you at different levels. So that's not a hierarchical statement. But not just demographically. I think in terms of those values, personality, and lived experience, and we're seeing that more and more in the legal sector. Interestingly enough, I think I don't want to be dismissive of this. I don't think a lot of this is quite a lot of things are quite small actually, in the sense that for our lawyers here, visible role models in senior positions signal what's possible, but it's not just visibility. It's about the leaders at whatever level. They need to be accessible, right? They need to be authentic and willing to sponsor, not just mentor. Mentoring is important, also sponsor, which has been a theme throughout this discussion. And then how do we do that? Well, quite simply, there's other factors, but through very active inclusion networks and more broadly to kind of help create that visibility and that momentum. And I think, engagement-wise, give people a voice, not just a role. So people are more likely to stay where they feel heard, where they feel empowered, able to contribute beyond their legal technical skill set or my technical skill set in the professional services sense. So regular check-ins, right? I know this is simplistic, but actually sometimes the simple things are the easiest things. Regular check-ins, there's transparent career pathways in law, and that collaborative decision-making help kind of support a lot of this. But for me, culture is that real retention strategy. Because you can hire the best talent, but if people don't feel safe, they don't feel valued, they don't feel accepted, well, they leave, and actually often silently.
Mm-hmm. Give people a voice, not just a role. I love that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rob. Colette, top tips.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that and would perhaps just sum it up as human connection. So we need proactive strategies and proactive action sets, of course, but at the heart of it all, I think, is human connection.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you. So we've got, that was phenomenal. We have tied in the CQ framework beautifully to those 4, what, why, how, and then actually the action part. I want to go to a couple of questions from the audience, and it looks like the chat is working. So feel free, everyone, to try and dabble with that in the last 4 minutes or so that we have. But some of the questions coming too. There's a question from Nikki for you, Colette. How do you apply CQ when considering expected behaviors from staff and code of conduct breaches?
Interesting. I think the short answer would be that we don't proactively do that at the moment. We don't proactively apply the CQ model when considering code of conduct breaches. It's perhaps something we should explore more. It's an area where we are proactively doing a lot of work, so ensuring that colleagues are clear about behavioural expectations, they're clear about the code of conduct, they're clear about the support that's available to them and the consequences for not adhering. And of course, in any conversation about core code of ethics in fire or conduct, you would be talking about the why, but we're not specifically applying CQ at the moment. Perhaps something Ritika, for you and I to explore when we next meet.
Yeah, so I would tie that in with why do we expect people to behave in a certain way? So we're very clear on this is what's accepted. And then the knowledge part, that this is where if the boundaries are crossed, we're not. This is again back to why we wouldn't accept that. But that code of conduct breach is very much that CQ action. And you already mentioned the fact that the consequences of not following it because this is where the organization's vision is, mission is, and this is what we are here to do. And so this is what we will accept, and this is what we want. That clarity of purpose and clarity of consequences is so key to making it work. Okay, so the next question is, what would be included in a good, I'm assuming, CQ strategy to attract younger talent into an organization that may seem unattractive to them naturally? Rob, Lionel, either of you?
I mean, I don't mind kicking it off. I would say that every strategy would need to be tailored and really focused on what industry specifically do we believe is unattractive to a younger group. I think talking to stakeholders that come from that generation is really important as well, to get a sense of what they like, what they don't like, and then seeing how you can reimagine and focus on the skills as opposed to the reputation and the stereotype as a starter.
Thank you, Lionel. Rob, anything to add to
Yeah,
that?
so we haven't yet done it in the early talent space, but it's an interesting question. So thank you for it. I think I would echo what Lionel said. I think you've got to understand kind of current perception. I think you've got to understand what the young talent may want and what the young talent values. I think there's kind of a building that trust and connection point as well, which starts in some cases at grassroots, even in the legal sector. And then again, we haven't done it, but I would have thought kind of aligning kind of culture with social movements, perhaps. We need to, again, the point that Lionel has said around kind of tailoring that communication and tailoring our brand, our EVP, etc., around whatever has been said at the start in terms of our fact finding. Yeah, that's probably what I'd say for now. Or to follow, I suspect.
No, that's perfect. And I like the point that Vinny's made there. I wish we had the chat all along, but I love that codes of conduct themselves need to be tailored to a cultural nuance lens for sure. So the code of conduct is right by whose eyes. I love that point, Vinny. Thank you for sharing that. Really, I just want to close this off with a huge thank you. There is a very important question from Ash that I do want to answer it quickly, which is what is how do you find, what is the greatest challenge of persuading leaders for the value of CQ? I mean, in a nutshell, what is the option of not? As a leader, one of the quotes that I use is, whatever that got us here is not enough to keep us here. Simply put, whichever generation you're in, whatever your visible identities, whatever it is that got us here is not enough to keep us here. And so CQ becomes more relevant than ever before. But huge thank you. A recording will be sent out to everyone that has signed up. And thank you for the participation from the audience, but also huge thank you to my wonderful panelists for authentically, vulnerably, and very wisely sharing your top tips and expert wisdom. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and look forward to staying connected one way or another.
See you soon. Go well.
Thanks,
Thank
Ritika.
you.
Thanks for having us.